Hello and welcome to the first episode of our new show, the Durban Dialogues. My name is Vuyo Mvoko and I'm your host for this special series. In 3 weeks, nations of the world will be meeting in Durban to discuss one of the most serious challenges facing our planet, climate change. Now, those in the know say we can ignore it at our own peril, of course, but the truth is the world is facing a catastrophe on a scale never seen before. Now, to help us kick off tonight's discussion, our producer, Vusizwe Langa, went to find out what the fuss is all about, and perhaps more importantly, why we should all care.
INingizimu Afrika isohleni lwamazwe angamashumi amabili aphezulu ekhiqizeni igas engcolisa umoya, greenhouse gas. Lokhu ke kungenxa ukuthi yathembele emalahleni ukukhiqiza ugesi. Ongcweti bakholwa ukuthi amazwe aseningizimu neAfrika kumanje asengcupheni yokuguquguquka kwesimo sezulu, njengoba ke kumanje kunesomiso, izikhukhula kanye nokukhuphuka kwamazinga okushisa.
This has far-reaching impacts. We could see some areas dry out and see very little rain.
Empeleni yini ngempela ke i-climate change lena?
Climate change is actually the persistent changing in our weather patterns that are seen over a period of time, but that are actually caused by the temperatures around the world increasing.
Kanti akhushulwa yini ngempela amazinga okushisa?
Over time, since the Industrial Revolution, humankind has been emitting carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, which actually cause the earth and the atmosphere to warm up. We'll be seeing changes in our weather systems, and over and above that, we will unfortunately be seeing many more natural disasters.
I-climate change inselelo ke enkulu ebhekene nabantu kumanje. Nakho ke okuzokwenzeka uma kungenziwa imizamo yokubhekana nomphumela wayo. Zizoshayeka iphethu zamanzi, njengoba ke komile kwamanye amadamu. Ukhiqizwa kommbila nakho kuzokwehla, nalokho ke okuzokwenza sigcineke sesiguqukela emabeleni akwazi ukubekezelela isomiso. Amadlela azosha, umhlaba ube sengozini yokuhlaselwa ke izihlahla ezingezi umsinso okuzimilela. Izokhindlabezeka impilo yemvelo, zibe sengozini izihlahla nezimbali ezifana ne-fynbos ye-Cape Floral Kingdom. Kuzokwanda izifo ezifana nomalaleveva nezinye ke ezidalwa ke ukungcola kwamanzi. Kuzokwenyuka izinga lamanzi olwandle, kuguqule izinkathi zokufuduka kweinhlanzi. Kwande nokhula lolwandle, kufa inhlanzi nezinye izilwane zolwandle. Yini ngempela edinga ke ukwenziwa ukwehlisa umthelela wokuguquguquka kwesimo sezulu?
Unfortunately, we are going to have to change and move to more renewable sources of energy to help us survive.
Sekuyobonakala seqoqwa ke ukuthi ingabe iNingizimu Afrika kanye namanye amazwe angcolisa kakhulu umoya afana neMelika, China, India, Brazil neMexico bazokwethula imigomo engcono yokunciphisa ukungcolisa umoya emhlanganweni ozayo wezokuguquguquka kwesimo sezulu, iCOP17. Vusizwe Langa, Durban Dialogues.
Well, to help us further demystify this subject, let's welcome 3 South Africans who've been grappling with this issue for years now. Sinegugu Zukulu is from Indalo Yetu, an agency that was set up in 2002 after the 2002 World Summit on Sustainable Development. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
And next to him is Melita Still, who is from Greenpeace Africa, a very active international environmental watchdog and lobby group. Next to her is Richard Worthing, who is representing the World Wildlife Fund, one of the world's largest independent conservation organizations. Welcome to all 3 of you. Perhaps let's start with you, Sinegugu. Ordinary people are asking the question, what exactly is climate change? And why should we care?
Okay, climate change is mainly about the changing weather patterns, or climate patterns rather, which are affecting us, which are affecting people and will continue to affect people, or increasingly affect people in their daily lives, affect in particular the livelihoods, your food supply, your transport system, your infrastructure. If you are looking, for instance, we've just seen now with this snapshot that with the floods, with the droughts. So in other words, the changing climatic patterns are here and mainly being caused by human activities. So therefore, that's what, when we talk about climate change, I'll summarize it in that. Thank you.
Melita, what are these things that we're talking about? What are these things that we're doing wrong that are affecting our climate and are threatening our very own existence?
Well, climate change, it's undisputed that climate change actually is caused by human activities. So since the Industrial Revolution, humans have been doing all kinds of things which have been increasing the greenhouse gases concentration in the atmosphere. One of the worst things that human beings are doing is actually building coal-fired power stations. So in a country like South Africa, more than 90% of our electricity comes from coal. And Eskom is currently building two of the biggest coal-fired power stations in the world at the moment, Medupi and Kusile. And that is in complete contradiction to the kind of action that needs to be taken to stop climate change. Specifically, countries should be looking to move away from coal and nuclear and towards renewable energy.
Richard?
Well, let's remember that it comes to the carbon cycle in the first instance. So carbon is the main constituent of most greenhouse gases, and you'll hear people talk about carbon in the atmosphere as shorthand for carbon dioxide, methane, and the other greenhouse gases. As the concentrations in the atmosphere build up, so we trap more heat within our atmosphere. And our atmosphere is like a tissue-thin layer. If you think of the Earth as about a large ball, the atmosphere is not actually that thick. And so as we increase the greenhouse gases, we trap more of the heat, and so we overheat the climate system, driving extreme weather events and also sea level rise. So as the oceans get warmer, sea levels rise. Also, as the ice caps melt, they also add water into the oceans. But the most of the impacts that we're seeing at the moment are the extreme weather events like the severe droughts that have been mentioned, more extreme floods, and also shifts in rainfall pattern that disrupt agriculture. So a lot of farmers are finding that they might be getting rains after they've done the planting and their crops fail, or they may come too soon or become too intense and thus wash the seeds away. So we have to really think about cutting down how humans add to the carbon cycle faster than it can work through that cycle. And that means reducing our greenhouse gases. By the end of this century, we should be adding nothing more to the concentrations in the atmosphere, because they stay there for a long time. So there's a long lag between the emissions and the impacts we see. We are not seeing today the impacts of emissions that we're putting out today. We're seeing the impacts from some 30, 40 years ago. And that's what makes climate change so challenging. The inertia, lag in the system, where the impacts only follow much after the emissions go out there.
Thank you. Now, Snekugu, your agency is tasked with mobilizing the people of South Africa, making them aware of the sort of things that all three of you were talking about. But it would seem that South Africans don't know much, or don't know as much as they should know about climate change. Would you agree that that is in fact the case?
Yes, I would agree that South Africans, they don't, and hence the effort. But in terms of how much or what percentage of South Africans you'd actually reach depends on how much resources you have at your disposal. And so, for instance, we have started a massive project recently, which started last week on the 27th, which titled the Climate Change Train, which started from Cape Town, will be passing through 17 cities and towns till it reaches Durban on the 27th of November, which is a huge project, which we have done that in response exactly to what you are saying, the fact that South Africans do not know much, or do not know as much as one would be willing to see them.
Before the train, what were the other projects that you undertook to increase awareness among South Africans?
Okay, currently we have got 250 awareness officers who are spread nationwide in all the provinces in South Africa, whose responsibility is bringing in the awareness, not only about the climate change, of course, also about the other environmental issues. They are making people aware so that we end up with an eco-conscious society, people who are able to do the right things for the environment.
Well, we're going to get into the detail of those things that ordinary South Africans can do to mitigate the impacts of climate change. We are going to take a very quick commercial break, and when we come back, we interrogate this issue. Why should we care about climate change, and how is it going to affect each and every one of us? So don't go away. We'll be right back after this. Okay, we're back. 7, 6. Welcome back. You're watching the Durban Dialogues, coming to you live from SABC Studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. You can, of course, join this conversation by sending an SMS to 33726. That number again, 33726. Or by visiting our Facebook page, the Durban Dialogues. Now, while some of us may still be in the dark about climate change, or cynically wondering whether this thing is indeed for real, there are South Africans who don't think we have the luxury of time, people who are hard at work trying to make a difference, armed with very little or no resources, but a determination to do good. This man is one of them.
Climate change, I think it's a change of weather, and it has been caused, according to my knowledge, ozone layer and the technologies. Most of the people are now doing things using electricity.
Climate change is the shifting of the weather patterns.
Looking at some places where you get flooding and all that, all of those are climate defects and all that, and it's not favorable to mankind.
Climate change to me is basically just the earth getting hotter, and obviously the poles just melting down and just more water.
Understand what say is when the weather it changes from a certain pattern to a certain pattern.
People there expressing their views, telling us how they understand or don't understand this issue that we're talking about today. Let me start with you, Richard. Now, we're reaping the rewards. We're reaping what we sow. But we're here now. Now, what do ordinary South Africans do to mitigate the impact of climate change, taking into account that they are within their rights to say, but we are largely not responsible for this? There are people who have actually benefited from polluting our environment, and maybe they are the ones who should be cleaning up. What do you say to such people?
Well, there's two things that have to happen to address climate change. One is, as you say, mitigation, reducing the greenhouse gases we're putting into the atmosphere, and that is mostly the affluent people, because those of us who have cars, etc., are responsible for most of those emissions. And of course, there is also the time issue. I mentioned there's a big lag between the atmospheric emissions building up and the impacts in terms of the climate changing, becoming more volatile. But then there's also the consequences, the impacts, what people can do to adapt to the impacts of climate change. So for some people, it's really getting to understand how the climate is changing, what it's going to mean for them, whether they need to vary planting patterns for agriculture. But for the affluent, and particularly for those in countries which have been emitting for hundreds of years since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we need a complete change to a low carbon economy. And South Africa needs to be part of that, because we can't afford in the whole of Africa to go through the development pathway that involved massive use of fossil fuels. So we all have to find alternatives. The good news of this is that the renewable energy technologies which don't put greenhouse gases into the atmosphere involve more jobs. So what we actually need is a just transition to a low carbon economy, particularly to 100% renewable energy over time. And so the roles for different people will depend on where they are at the moment. For some, it's becoming workers in the green economy. For others, it's giving up some of their very wasteful behaviors so that they mitigate their individual carbon footprint.
So if I hear Richard correctly, it's ordinary people are just as guilty. In other words, the sort of things that we do, whether we're driving our own cars or whether when we eat and when we do all the sort of things that and drink and do all the nice things that we do, we are in fact polluting the environment and thereby contributing to worsening the problem.
I don't think it's necessarily about guilt. That's a very negative way of putting it. And that sort of automatically makes people defensive. Like, I didn't cause this, I don't need to do anything. The fact is that choices have been made that people are not necessarily, we're not part of. But we are all part of the problem, all together. And that means that we all need to be responsible for taking action to actually rectify the problem and actually fix it. And that means that it's in our power. We have the power to make the difference. Individuals like you or like me, or like people in the street, we can all do it in different ways.
Like
someone like me, I can use less electricity, I can drive a smaller car, I can carpool, all of those kinds of things. I can recycle, all of those things that are shifting towards a more sustainable kind of living. I don't think all South Africans are very good at doing that at the moment. And then if you look at poorer communities, you're looking at, again, sustainable agriculture, also putting pressure on municipalities to deliver renewable energy to your community. Why are municipalities not 100% renewable? Why, so ordinary people can put that pressure and can make those small changes. I think people should not feel like they can't make a difference, and small changes do add up to a big change.
Now, if I listen to all of you, these things are within our means. There's a lot that's within our means that we can do. The question perhaps is, which is probably repeating something I had asked earlier, why are our people still in the dark about the little things that are within their means that they can do to change what we are facing?
Okay, one answer to that is awareness. We need to get to those people, and also awareness. We can categorize it, look at them, but the most important thing is to make sure that people are aware that they can.
Whose job is it to do that?
It is our job. It is the media's job, like we're doing now. It is my job as an agent to do awareness. It is the NGOs, but it is an ordinary South African like you to be able. So we all, like you correctly pointed out, we are all in it together, and there is no single individual organization that can actually claim that they could make everyone aware. So our in it together is everyone's responsibility. It is, for instance, the educators or teachers at school. It is those kids at school who have been exposed to awareness. It is the poets. It is the musicians, the artists we have in this country. We are in it together, and we all have to make sure that if I have if I'm aware, if I'm informed, I make sure that I pass what I know. For instance, for somebody who's at home and is listening now, so we need to take that and share with the people who are immediately in our surrounding. For instance, things such as changing your light bulb, making sure that when you go to the shop, instead of buying an ordinary bulb, we buy the energy saving bulb. Instead of always keep on taking plastic bags. For instance, the good thing in South Africa is that now the shopkeepers, they ask you, do you want the plastic? Because there's a law which is actually was passed in Parliament to try and reduce the amount of plastic we use in this country, but people are not aware. So awareness is everybody's responsibility.
Okay, let's throw this to the floor. I mean, we have a few organizations here, non-governmental organizations and community-based organizations that are also involved in trying to mitigate the impact of climate change. I'm going to ask one or two people to maybe pose some questions or make some comments. Anybody? If you can just tell us who you are and where you're coming from.
Yes, I'm Luke Lamini from Bumalanga. We are with EcoLink, which consists of various organizations working around climate change. And then first of all, to commend the panel. My question will be, how fast are we moving towards addressing the issue of climate change, more especially on renewable energy? And in South Africa, we are getting solar panels at a very high cost. How best can we get them at a lower cost for rural communities?
Any takers?
Well, if I may suggest that the first thing in terms of solar panels that we need to do is commit to installing them at scale. At the moment, it's just not happening at a large enough scale. And let's distinguish between the photovoltaics, the expensive ones, which convert sunlight into electricity, relatively expensive, compared to coal-fired power stations, for example, which aren't paying for the full costs of what they're doing. There's a lot of external costs involved there. But then the solar water heaters, which are starting to expand in application in South Africa, are actually cost-effective. The energy payback period the payback period in terms of your investment, so the energy you get from the sun instead of buying electricity, it'll pay for itself in 4 to 8 years, depending on how you use it, how much hot water and how much electricity backup you get. But to come back to the first part of your question, how are we doing? Are we moving fast enough? Well, absolutely not. As a planet, as humanity as a whole, we are far short of where we need to be to avoid runaway and catastrophic climate change, and in South Africa we are far behind where we could and should be. So we really need to put in market adjusting mechanisms so that the full costs of what we're doing at the moment are reflected, and so that options like solar that you highlight and also wind have a better chance to compete with the dirty options, which are actually free riding on the present and of course on the future, because it is our kids that are going to carry most of the cost of our polluting ways in the present.
Thanks, Richard. Malita?
Yeah, certainly. I think that when it comes to renewable energy, South Africa, less than 1% of our electricity actually comes from renewables at the moment. More than 90% of our electricity comes from coal. And we're not, although the South African government is talking a lot about climate change, which is really good, and saying that it's important that we act on it, the urgency and the ambition that is needed, as Richard said, to get renewables up to scale isn't there yet. So according to research that Greenpeace has done, 50% of our electricity could come from renewable energy by 2030. But the government is only aiming for 23%. So what Greenpeace is saying is that the only way to make this kind of shift, this energy revolution that we need, is actually if it is approached with enough urgency and ambition, and that means acting today, and talk is not enough. It actually requires action.
Yes. I think the other thing which, as a country, that we have not prioritized is making resources available to people doing that job.
Who should make the resources available?
Okay, it is all of us. Again, it is your private sector, the business. It is the government. For instance, even looking at the white paper which we have, which is the response to climate change. But I think when we get to implementing that, we hope that we are going from the government side, from the corporate to social investment within the business sector, making sure that the people, the NGOs, the agencies, everyone who is doing that work of awareness has got access to resources.
Thank you very much. Well, before we take another short break, let's remind you that you can, of course, take part in tonight's topic by SMSing your views to 33726. That number again, 33726, or by visiting our Facebook page. Don't go away. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back. You're watching the Durban Dialogues on SABC1 Mzansi for sure. Now, let's have a look at this insert about a man who has been involved in environmental education since 1994.
Meet Moki Kekisani, liberation struggle stalwart turned environmental activist. Since 1994, he has been educating fellow Port Elizabeth residents about the need to preserve the environment and in the process, literally dirtying his hands. It's his new terrain of struggle.
My biggest wish is that what I'm doing in the townships be taken up by other people, you know, in other townships. Because what you find is that when you talk about the township, you talk about filth, you talk about debt, you talk about crime, you talk about unemployment, you talk about landlessness of people. So when you go to other places, which are the affluent places, you don't see these things. So what I'd like to see is that my people in the townships involved in awareness of the environment.
Kekisani hopes that people like him, those who work in and with communities, will have their voices heard when the world meets.
Lisa, let me start with you. People like Moki Kekisani, people like the activists we are seeing here from the Landless People's Movement and other NGOs, who have been doing their bit in their own little corners with very little or no resources. How do we encourage them to spread the gospel?
I think one of the key things that will be getting out of COP17 is not only awareness. It's also the fact that now we have a climate change response policy that looks at various sectors, you know, from health, biodiversity, agriculture, waste management, energy generation, etc. And all that, you know, there are specific government departments that have a responsibility of ensuring that there is an appropriate response to climate change. So I can foresee a situation where there's a scaling up of activities that various departments undertake.
We will be interrogating all those big picture issues, I think, in future episodes. What I want us to drive home today, hopefully at the end of this show, we'll all have been able to pass the message, to spread the gospel among South Africans, to say, this is what you can do in your little corner. And this is why this is important, not only for you, but for future generations as well. How, as the Department of Environmental Affairs, are you ensuring that South Africans, one, are aware, but not only that, they get up and do something?
Yes. I think there's various programs that the department is involved in. An example being Indaloyetu is a Department of Environmental Affairs agency, which specifically is looking at raising awareness. And there's a lot of work even internally within the department that we are doing on public outreach and awareness. An example being the work of the climate train that Indaloyetu is doing. At the moment, there's work that several non-governmental organizations are undertaking, such as the C17 group going towards COP17. Those are all important stakeholders that are ensuring that there's concrete work that ordinary South Africans can undertake.
David, is there a role that academic institutions are playing in raising awareness, in getting South Africans to take this issue very seriously and to do something about it?
Good evening, Vuyo, and good evening to your viewers. Thank you for pitching that question to me. I was wondering where you would come from. I'm here this evening representing a new institution at WITS. We call the Global Change and Sustainability Research Institute. A bit of a mouthful for you there. And we launch on Tuesday next week. WITS is 90 years old next year.
What is it? What does it seek to do?
What we're trying to do is get academics from all fields together. The experienced hands at this, and I'm not one of them, have said to crack this problem, we've got to get everyone together. We've got to get the engineers together, the scientists, one of my colleagues, the scientists here from a different institution, but scientists together. We've got to get the economists and the business people, that you're looking at myself now. And you've also got to get the humanities together, because we've got to change the architecture between the ears and in the heart.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, because there is a perception out there that academics, professors and lecturers, all the people who are doing the research, seem to know this subject but do very little to transmit it, to bring it down to the level that people can actually understand it so that they are able to do something about it.
Well, you've given us our work for the next year or two. For you, I hear your point there. What we're sort of saying at WITS is, in the next few years, any student that goes through WITS will certainly be very, very aware of energy, because one of the big things you've heard about this evening is about energy and energy consumption. So that's one area we will tackle, but I take your point there that we must get out and get the message very simple and direct.
Dr. Adegoke, the role of science and scientists in helping our people understand this issue better.
Thank you, Vuye. I'd like to just scale up a little bit and connect with the comments that my colleague has just made right now. We see climate change as a major challenge, in fact, you use the word catastrophe, coming down the road. But we also see it, without taking away from the seriousness of that problem. It is also an important and a major opportunity for us to begin to look at how we can use that challenge to create a whole new generation of people, and use science as a platform for addressing this problem, and in fact, use this challenge as one of the major planks towards the drive towards a knowledge economy in South Africa. And the Department of Science and Technology, which is the oversight ministry department for CSIR, where I work for, has been playing a major role here, in terms of linking linking the dots and creating the space, for us to begin to think innovatively about how we use science, how we create opportunities.
How we use school kids, for example, to make them aware of to make them environmentally aware, and to get them to get their parents, their peers, their mates, and everybody, people at their churches and so on, to actually get to know more about climate change. Are scientists prepared to do that? Or are you even thinking about it as scientists?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, let me refer to two documents that have been put on the table currently. We've already talked about the white paper, the response white paper. If you look at that response white paper, which came out of the Department of Environmental Affairs, they have shown very serious leadership on this particular issue. It includes and in fact outlines very clear strategies, for the science community, for the policy community, to begin to connect our work to the school children, their parents, and the external environment. Now, the second document that I would like to refer to very briefly is the Department of Science and Technology Global Change Grand Challenge. Okay, this is one of the grant documents or initiatives that, again, it's creating the space for scientists to come together. Similar to what WITS is doing. In fact, WITS is one of the institutions in this program.
Let me ask you to hold your thought right there and go to some of the NGO representatives that are here. Do you feel, when you hear our panelists saying what they have said up until now, do you feel that they speak to your issues? Do you feel that they speak to the sort of things that you care about and you want done and done now? Yes. Tell us who you are and where you come from.
Thank you very much. My name is Angeline Gwaze, and I'm the official consultant for the 14th Southern and Eastern Africa Rainwater Network. That is going to be hosting a conference in Mpumalanga, also looking on the issues of climate change, how we can mitigate and adapt And the conference will be taking place as of the 13th to the 18th of November. And we believe that then this conference will then open a way for the policymakers, the professors, and the business people to then further talk more about the resolutions. Now, coming back to the issues that have been talked about, buying a small car, throwing away litter, that will not address the issue of starvation today. It will not address the the issue of the lack of food. We need to sustain livelihoods at the moment. One of the panelists who was there before talked about awareness, but awareness without implementation means nothing. And therefore, as we forge ahead in terms of climate change and looking at ways of exploring how we can look at strategies and technologies that we can use to adapt to climate change, we then want to promote the issue of rainwater harvesting within the communities. Because once then we start to harvest water at household level within the communities, we are then able to address the issue of poverty, which is at hand right now. Yes, COP17 is coming. It is more of policy. It is more of, the high flyer type of a person, but the ordinary person who is affected on the ground, who has no machinery, who has no technology, who has no infrastructure, then needs to be told about how they can then be able to mitigate and adapt to these climate changes through doing programs that bring food on the table, hence rainwater harvesting as a theme.
Thank you very much. We are going to speak to a lot more of you, but as we approach the last segment of our show, we're going to take a quick commercial break. And of course, I am going to give some of you a chance to say what you want to say to these people, but to South Africa at large. So don't go away. Let's take another quick commercial break, and we'll be back right after this. Welcome back. You're watching a live broadcast. We're coming to you from Auckland Park here in Johannesburg. Now let's continue our discussion. We were hearing from the community-based organizations and NGOs that are here. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Buyo. My name is Mangoba Dlamini from an NGO called EcoLink in Mpumalanga. You've been speaking and I've been listening to the panel here, and you said, what can we do tangible when we come out of this conference? And I want to draw this point to you, everyone who's here, that EcoLink in Mpumalanga, we are already doing it. Issues of rainwater harvesting, we are putting rainwater structures for communities, with the communities themselves, and we build these structures to mitigate the effects of climate change.
Where do you get the resources? How do you put together your ideas? How do other communities learn from your project?
Okay. Thanks, Vio, for that question. What we have to do, we use what we call an integrated method, integrated rainwater harvesting system, whereby we bring policymakers, whereby we bring local people, we bring research. We've been working closely with the University of Western Cape, Anthropology for Water Science, whereby we look at issues. They come and do research on ground and publish, and we publish papers and we publish pamphlets. You spoke about how do we address, we talk to schools, we use puppetry. Puppetry theater, where we do environmental awareness within the province itself. So there's a lot that is happening on ground that is not actually documented. But as an NGO, we have taken this step. And we have taken another bold step by hosting, in a week's time, on the 14th of November to 18th of November, we are hosting what we call a CNET conference, which is a conference between EcoLink South Africa and the Southern African and the Eastern African Rainwater Network. So...
Great stuff. Let's hear from other people who could be doing things in their communities that are busy, that are helping to deal with this challenge that we're all facing. You're not from EcoLink?
Yeah.
Can you give somebody else? Can you give somebody else a chance? Can you give the Landless People's Movement?
Hi, good night. I'm Mans van Wyk from the Landless People's Movement. Well, I won't comment so much of what we are doing so for the community so much environmentally, because the environmental is affecting us, mostly the people who stays in informal settlements, because we are forced to stay in informal settlements due to the cost of land, which is scarce for the poor people, but the land is there for the rich. And now we see this thing of of the COP17. It's like the sister was also already raising that it is just a policy. It's going to benefit most of the people who gain something from the capital.
But what we're saying here is that here's an opportunity. Here's a conference that's happening on our doorstep. Why shouldn't you be using this opportunity now that everybody is listening? Now that we've got everybody's attention, we've got the country's attention, we've got the policymakers' attention, we've got the attention of the private sector and the international community about an issue that is affecting you directly. As you say, you have issues with with land. You don't have the land to actually do the sort of things that you'd like to do, and to also minimize the impacts of climate change. So now that everybody is listening, what would you like to see?
We want to see our youth especially being educated and workshop pending all those things, but because most of the time the education is not there for our people, they don't get enough education of the climate change. Even if you talk about it, some of them, they just wonder what is this thing about climate change. And some of us who are activists within the movement, we have not clear information about all this climate change, because we also need education pending that. So we will like that they must educate our people and also offer land to us so that we can do agricultural programs on the land. But we have little spaces of land to do our agriculture problems. So it is a problematic still for us without education.
Okay, let's take one quick question. That at the back.
Yeah, my name is William Rukasha, also from EcoLink. My concern is the issues that my friend Ian is raising from the homeless. My concern is on the land. Was one of the challenges that we got is that from the initial presentations is that the human activity actually also is contributing to effects of climate change.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Well, we are going to take another quick commercial break, and when we come back, we'll listen to everybody and try and wrap up this discussion. But most importantly, hopefully we'll be able to come up with something that says, when we come out of this gathering, when we leave this little discussion this evening, at least someone out there in one corner in South Africa will know what to do starting tomorrow to help us deal with the challenge we're all facing. Let's take a quick commercial break. Welcome back. You're watching a live broadcast. We're coming to you from our Auckland Park studios here in Johannesburg. And the topic this evening, climate change. What do we know about it? Why should we care? What's the fuss all about? Now, I'm going to ask our panelists here to very briefly say, if each one of you had one wish, or could tell us how when we walk out of here, we can help our people to understand this issue better. But not only that, for them to be able to get up and do something about it. What would that be?
Okay. I would say for me, one of the key critical areas where we can make a difference in the understanding of climate change is with schools. because I think a common thread of the discussion that we've had today has been about changing behaviors, how we relate to natural resources, and generally with our environment. And bad habits die hard. So I think one of the major intervention points we should be looking at is school children who will make the right choices and put pressure on us as adults, to make the right choices when it comes to natural resource management.
Vuyo, that's a tough one. And I'll be honest, because where I'm coming from is the ivory tower, not been in a nasty sense, but we do research. So I've had to really rack my brains to come up with one on that one there. And
but you are within a community, a community of students that you can use to spread the message around.
But absolutely. But a lot of the people here are at the harder end of South Africa. I mean, that's the truth of the matter. So if I could pitch and if I could cheat and give you two answers. The first one is regarding food. There is a lot of research being done on different agricultural food products. So in theory, a university, and not just FITS, any university, could go out into the country and start experimenting with the new food types, because that is one of the big crunches, is keeping people fed. So academics could help there.
Doctor,
here we go.
Science and scientists, how can they help, especially with awareness?
That's right. I think my key message really is that climate change, while it is a threat, it's also a great opportunity for us in South Africa. A great opportunity to develop innovative ways for how we use water, for instance. We know that water is going to continue to be a major stress, a major resource constraint around water. And we need new technologies around how we use water more. We need to be a little more smart about how we use water. And science and technology offers us opportunities for that. We need to have better ways for treating what we have, for instance. A lot of recycling technologies that could be developed, and approaches about how we use. We just need to get smarter. Smarter as a society, all of us, about how we use what we have now. Because it's not going to increase. In fact, with climate change coming, the stress is going to be even greater on the little that we have now. So that's the key message. The key message is that we do have an opportunity, as a society, to get a little smarter in terms of how we use resources to meet our needs.
Thank you very much. Snagugu, I want to end with you. I think all we've been talking about today, certainly for most of the time, has been how do we make South Africans aware of the danger we're facing, but not only that, how do we get them to have the sort of information that they can use to actually do something? Very briefly.
Okay. I think the most important thing, the project we're driving now, is the climate change, which is doing awareness across the country. And it's in Krugersdorp now, tomorrow, and it's going to come to Nasrec, to Centurion, to Boomspruit, Bulugwane, Louis Trichardt, then Standerton, Ladysmith, Pietermaritzburg, and then to Durban on the 27th. So I think if people could come there, that's one huge impact, working with the artists on drama, music, theater, and all that. There's a lot developing climate charter, the people making their own communities, what they would do to change.
Thank you very much. Well, that's all we had time for this evening. Thanks very much to our panelists who are here and those who are sitting there, but also to the non-governmental organizations and the community-based organizations that came and became part of the audience. Thank you very much for making this discussion worthwhile. And in the next few weeks, we will, of course, be bringing you more and more topics about how you can get involved in this discussion, but more importantly, in doing something for our planet, not only for us, but for future generations as well. So do write to us. Our email address, mvokov@sabc.co.za, mvokov@sabc.co.za, but do also visit our Facebook page, the Durban Dialogues. From me and the rest of the crew, have a good night and thank you very much.